we're going to talk about how to make a good cup of coffee at home. The method I'm going to be using is brewing with a Chemex brewer, which is a manual pour-over method. There are a lot of good methods to brew at home, and French press and the V60, which are common things that people have, or other methods, but this is what we're going to do today. So the first thing that I think about when I'm brewing a cup of coffee is the ratio between coffee to water. Sort of like the most basic thing that we do in order to determine that a coffee is going to have quality. So I'm going to use a scale to make sure that that ratio is correct. We're doing a ratio in terms of weight. So I have 30 grams of coffee that I've weighed out, and I'm going to grind that on the grinder. I use a pretty coarse grind for this because I'm going to do a pretty tight ratio, and so I'm also going to have like a coarser grind to sort of balance that cup out. So the first thing I'm going to do with the brewer is actually rinse the filter. These filters are bleached, and so we don't want any of that sort of like bleach taste to get into the cup, or any of that like paper taste to get into the cup. It's not like it's unhealthy or anything like that. We're just trying to make sure that the flavor is perfectly clear. The Chemex is interesting and different from a lot of brewers because it has a really, really thick filter. This paper is just a lot thicker than a standard coffee filter, and it also doesn't have any like micro perforations like a lot of other types of filters do, where like on a really close level you can kind of see that they're almost perforated. And so it creates a really clean, silky cup when you brew with this. So I'm adding 30 grams of coffee to this filter. I use the tip of my finger to make a little well in the center, so that when I pour the first water, it doesn't go to the side, it kind of stays in the center. I'm making coffee for other folks. I don't usually put my finger in it, but I'm the only one who's going to drink this one, so that's okay. And then I'm filling my kettle up with 208-degree water. When it fills into this cold kettle, it'll lose a little bit of its temperature, so it'll end up just around 205 degrees, which is a great temperature for brew and pour overs. One of the things that doesn't work great with a lot of inexpensive home auto drip machines is that they brew under 200 degrees, and that means that they don't fully extract a lot of the flavors out of the coffee. So we're using 205-degree water, and the first thing that we're going to do is start our timer and pour about 60 grams of water onto these grounds. So what's happening right now is this coffee is degassing. As the water hits the coffee, it's causing carbon dioxide to release, and we're allowing that to like come up into the air, and so that it won't be pushed down into the coffee. When the carbon dioxide bonds with water, it forms carbonic acid, which is what creates a lot of bitter flavors in coffee. So by allowing it to degas just for about 30 seconds, we're ensuring that the cup is going to be cleaner and sweeter tasting. So we're at 30 seconds now, and so we're going to start to pour. I'm pouring in concentric circles, focusing more on the middle because of this tented shape. The middle is deeper, so it needs more water, but I'm still going around to the edges to ensure that everything gets fully wet. So I usually pour in a few different pulses. With some methods that are pour overs, especially with thinner filters where the water runs faster through, you kind of have to have a consistent pour. But the Chemex allows you to do pulse pouring, where you pour a little bit, allow it to drain, and then pour some more to fill it back up. The reason you can do that is because of that thickness of that filter creates some back pressure, so the water doesn't really run as fast. So I've got about 200 grams of water in there total, and we're about at 1 minute and 30 seconds at this point. You can see it's dripping so slowly that we're actually seeing individual drips down here versus like a constant stream of water pouring. That's pretty typical of brewing the Chemex, even with a pretty coarse grind. So I'm doing another pulse here. I'm trying not to let it get too low. I want all of the grounds that are in there to be pretty consistently wet the entire time. As long as they're touching water that they're extracting, they don't necessarily have to be submersed underneath the water, just kind of like wet at all times so they continue the extraction process. So we're getting close to 2 minutes right now at about 250 grams of water. Doing another pulse. 4 minutes is about the time that you'll see in a lot of different guides for like how long your coffee should be in contact with water in order to get the appropriate extraction. That's a great like starting point. Anywhere from 2 minutes to 6 minutes can yield good brews as long as you're adjusting other factors around these. Because I'm using a relatively high dose of coffee and because it's got a pretty coarse grind, I'm gonna shoot for about 3.5 minutes. I'm gonna finish my pour around 3 minutes and then allow it to drain down for about another 30 seconds. So we're at 2 minutes and 45 seconds right now, and I'm pouring 390 grams total of water, which is a 13-to-1 ratio of coffee to water. That's a tighter ratio than a lot of people would use. Like a really normal ratio for brewing in coffee shops would be like 15-to-1 or 16-to-1. And a lot of people who are brewing at home are actually brewing more like 18, 19, 20-to-1. I like the really tight ratios because it yields a really flavorful and brightly flavored cup. Not just more flavor, but just that the flavors are actually like in a higher register. So you get a lot of like citrus notes, like lemony flavors, or like high, nice spicy notes. But it really just depends on what you're looking for. If you want a sweeter cup, then maybe do a wider ratio. If you want like a brighter cup, then you can do a tighter ratio. The smell that comes out of this, it's like funneled up, and it's this really intense sweet smell that's just like really special about this brew method. So you swirl it like this to aerate it, which sort of like makes that smell more powerful. And you can lean in there, and it's just a super cool thing that just the brewer gets to experience before you serve it. Again, getting your nose in somebody's coffee that you're serving to them isn't necessarily like polite, but I'm the one who's gonna drink this, so you kind of get that special experience. Always pre-rinse your cup with hot water, not just because it keeps your coffee warm, but also because a shock of hot coffee being poured into a cold cup isn't always good for it. If you want to get those really delicate flavors, you kind of want them to transition temperatures very slowly instead of quickly. It's delicious.